Good evening. My name is Greg Downs, and I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the City of Albany Social and Economic Justice Commission, an advisory body appointed by the City Council to make recommendations on issues of justice so that Council can act. This is not an official commission meeting and won't be governed by our public meeting rules, but our commission is your host tonight, though not the moderators. First, before we begin, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been Huichin and surrounding areas, including ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone and Bay Miwok, recognized in the Verona Band of Alameda County, and whose descendants now include members of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people, and they have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. So we're honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands as we meet. We meet here tonight because of you, because of the enormous public response to the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officers on May 25th, generated a groundswell of calls across the nation and the world to address the long-standing problems of anti-Black racism and specifically to address police violence against Black people. A call to the country to prove that Black lives matter. We are also here for reasons that go far back from May 25th to the country's founding, with the systematic exploitation and ownership of Black people as slaves, that in turn was followed by systematic disfranchisement of freed people, exclusion, segregation, and property seizures during Jim Crow, and that endures in American life in different ways. And we all know that George Floyd is not the only name that can be said, and there are other names from near and afar, including Petey Perez, whose El Cerrito family lives walking distance from all of us, to Breonna Taylor and many others. So the public outcry is heartening and important, and in many respects long overdue and a cause for optimism. So I hope as our meeting tonight, as we have representatives from different parts of the city to try and answer your questions. Here in Albany, the public has weighed in vast numbers in emails and town halls and public meetings, and we have a sense of some basic facts. Many people in the public believe the city has not examined systematic racism here, and wishes to address many things, including hiring, housing, business development, and schooling. And we also know that many, many people specifically wish the city to focus upon its policing policies, oversight, and budget to ensure we utilize our public safety funds in ways that support Albany's commitment to anti-racism. Many people write from their own pain at mistreatment on racial grounds and from a long commitment to struggle. Others write with concern about our police department and with praise for its professionalism and its reforms. Altogether, the letters and the comments ask us how we can be sure that the same thing does not happen here or is not happening here in Albany. In a democracy, the government acts on our behalf, and thus we have a responsibility individually and personally for its actions. And so the weight of a death at the hands of the government lands on all of our hands, all of our consciences, in my view, all of our souls. Throughout these letters, there is a call for more information and then for action. It is appropriate that the city's governing bodies listen, and it is also important to begin to respond. Tonight is a chance for the public's questions to be posed to different people from the city. By posing questions and getting answers, we all can learn more about the issues around systematic racism in the city. On some, we may find the answers clarify or even resolve questions. On others, we may find points of disagreement for further exploration and debate. Asking and answering questions from the public cannot be the end point, but it is a necessary step. In fact, if the public cannot directly ask questions to the institutions that serve them, the people may well wonder if they truly live under a democratic government. No one meeting can perfectly fulfill all these goals. After tonight, City Council will meet Monday, including in a study session on policing that begins at 6 p.m. The commission I chair, the Social and Economic Justice Commission, will meet on August 4th to move forward in our charge from council of formulating an equity action plan to present as a recommendation to council beginning in September. And in the end, the ideas presented by you here or by Scjc or by others will be decided upon by the City Council and perhaps again by voters in the November election. This meeting is only one piece of that effort, but I hope it is a helpful one in clarifying where we are and in turn where we should be going. It is my pleasure to introduce the Commission Vice Chair, Ms. Janelle Gary.
Thank you, Greg. As we continue to move forward, let's reflect on the things that make our city a great place to live. I know emotions are high and actions will need to be taken soon. However, the conversations will continue to intensify, but let's respect the process and work together to formulate solutions for generations to come. And with that said, I introduce Nicole Anderson.
Thank you very much for having me. Before I start with moderation, I wanted to also take opportunity to acknowledge the other SCJC members, in particular, Commissioner Kerr, Grossman, and Marks. Just want to thank them also for their hard work and collaboration with this work, and just want to thank them for joining us tonight, acknowledge them as well. I also just want to again acknowledge and thank you, Dr. Downs, for acknowledging the land we stand on. I think it's very important to always remember the space we're in is sacred, and we just don't want to take that lightly. Again, my name is Nicole Anderson, and I am just newly joining as a consultant for the City of Albany. I am joined here with my colleague as well, Dr. Shelley Holt, who will be joining us today and also working side by side with me to support the city's efforts to address institutional racism and racial equity in the City of Albany. I've had the distinct pleasure of working also with the Albany Unified School District and have participated in working with superintendent, their school board, as well as several administrators, and met many community members along the way. And so I'm just honored to be in this space. As I share with folks, I actually am honored because I get to hang out in Albany quite a bit and actually live in the city of Vallejo, but my daughter goes to St. Mary's College High School, and so I always get to pass through and have had that wonderful invitation. If I ever wanted to bring her to Albany Unified, I was welcome to do so. So I always appreciate that open arm. But I want to just give a little bit about myself. I first want to honor those who I stand on the shoulders of. I come from a lineage of advocacy. My grandfather is named Mr. Jesse Bethel. If you're familiar with Vallejo, there's a high school named after him. And in this work, I entered into advocacy because of his work. He was the first African-American to be the school board president. He was the first African-American to be a chemist on Mare Island shipyard, where he was a chemist by title, but was a janitor by trade because he wasn't allowed to have those same opportunities. And so I acknowledge and recognize the shoulders that I stand on, because he also advocated for racial equity in a time where we are also in a similar time of real need to heal and address these systemic issues. Coming into this space today, I just really appreciate all of the work that I've been able to do to address closing racial equity gaps around not only the state of California, but in numerous states. And really am honored to be here to learn more about what you need as a community. I recognize, as Chair Downs shared earlier, that we won't solve all the issues of institutional racism tonight, but we definitely want to continue to move along this journey. And I want to acknowledge City Council and leadership and all the panelists here today who are coming together in solidarity for wanting to do the right thing to address an institutional issue that has long been standing before we all were walking this earth. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to be in this space with you, and want to take a moment before we introduce our panelists formally. I want to take a moment to share with you kind of our purpose today, and also get a sense of who's on the call with us. I know we have lots of community members here, and just want to thank you for joining. And so again, today, our purpose, why we're here. This is designed to be a safe space. And when I say safe space, to address issues that haven't always been safe for everyone. Obviously a safe space not only for the residents, but also the panelists together. But this is a place for us to be heard and also to heal alongside each other. And this is important when we talk about addressing the issue of institutional racism, which is a very hard topic to discuss. but ultimately we have to be safe in the space. So we're not going to, we don't want to feel attacked. We don't want to feel like we're counterproductive. We want to feel like we're moving forward, and there will be discomfort. And I will describe what that looks like in a moment. But I also want to let you know that we're here to align and kind of deepen the partnership with the city and the community. It's important to continue to do this work together collectively, and it cannot be done by just one body alone. And so we want to talk about that today and get the perspective from the community. Also, this is an opportunity for the city leadership and also for all of our community members represented on the call today, on the panel, to demonstrate really this transparent and very sincere commitment to this work. And really following through with what we're discussing today, knowing that it is a journey and there's going to be a lot of non-closure. However, we are definitely all together today to really talk about the issues that have plagued not only our city, but obviously our nation and our world. The outcomes are for city leadership in particular, and obviously representing that leadership and this appointed body is the Social and Economic Justice Commission, which is an appointed body from the commission. From the council. And although this commission is not a decision-making body, it absolutely is a space to collect information, weigh in, do research, and really unpack what are those racial issues so that there can be a recommendation to city council to move forward. So today represents an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the diverse perspectives of the community. This is a data collection opportunity to hear those voices. It's an opportunity just to listen and to learn, and also to really give some clear communication about what the plans are moving forward. I think the community wants to hear that, and it very much makes sense that we're in a space to do so. And again, creating a safe space so we can have more meaningful, more deeper partnerships together. And that's really the overarching purpose. As I talk about safe space, I want to remind you of a few agreements that really help groups to stay fully engaged in this work. And again, we're talking about a long-term process. We're not talking about just in the next month or two. We're talking about addressing the system. And so I want to allude to Glenn Singleton's four agreements, which come from his work around courageous conversations about race. And his work really speaks about racism. And we know that as youngsters, we've been conditioned not to talk about race. So it's very uncomfortable. But the reality is that we've moved into a place now where we actually have felt more safe to talk about it. We've seen people protest. We've seen people change names on schools and buildings. And we've had a lot of conversation that was deeper than where we have been in the past. But while we're safe to talk about it, what's going to be the harder work is to be brave to do something about it and to follow through with actions that we say we want to see. And this is a collective process. And so I want you to think about what it sounds like, feels like, to stay engaged in this work today, whether it's uncomfortable or not. How do we stay engaged and lean in and really do that physically, mentally, emotionally? Experience discomfort. I ask that the community who's watching us either from Facebook Live or actually on the call today, that you experience discomfort and be okay. You may hear things you don't agree with. You may hear truths that people are sharing that just really kind of create some discomfort, but this work requires us to absolutely embrace discomfort. That's where growth happens. We want to speak our truth. I think hearing perspectives from the community is important, but also to hear the perspectives of the different panelists is important, to hear the truth so that we absolutely can do this work together. And everyone's perspective is necessary to come to this conclusion about how do we interrupt institutional racism. And last but not least is by 9:30, we're not gonna have non-closure. We're gonna have lots of non-closure. We're gonna have lots of questions, lots of work to do. But part of this work of addressing something like institutional racism requires you to expect and accept non-closure. So I ask that everyone who's on the call, who's watching, to really think about how these four agreements will stick with you and help guide this work. And not just tonight, but as you continue to have listening sessions, you continue to have task force, you continue to come together and speak in public and really meet with leadership and all the various stakeholder groups who maybe haven't had voices heard, have been a little invisible in the community. These four agreements are going to really help you to continue to move the work forward. So I just highly implore you to think about that as we move forward together. And so with that, I want to do a couple of introductions and of course remind you that again, we're on this Zoom platform, and while this is not the most ideal place to engage in this type of work, we know that COVID-19 has created a lot of obstacles, and so we're going to make this work today. But we do want you to recognize that Zoom obviously has a couple of opportunities for you to engage tonight. There is a Q&A feature for you to put your questions in. Many of you have shared questions ahead of time, so we appreciate that. And the gist of our work today will be asking our panelists to speak to those questions, but also there will be an opportunity for you to ask additional questions if you'd like to in the Q&A feature. We also will have all of our attendees muted unless you have an opportunity to speak during public comment, which you will have the opportunity. So you can use the raise hand feature at that time, and we will have time allotted for public comment. And so our agenda will have our panelist discussion first, our live Q&A to answer questions, and then we'll have public comment and then have some closing comments. And so I just want to make sure you have an idea of what we're going to be doing today. And so I'm going to, before we start with our panelist introductions, I'm going to ask that our community actually share who's on the line today. And so there's a poll feature that's going to pop up on the screen. And so as that poll comes up on the screen, I'm going to ask you as the community to please share what role primarily describes who you are in this community. And this gives us a really good idea of who's on the line, and so we can really have a great sense of our conversations today. And just again, want to appreciate you. So we're going to give you about a minute just to go ahead and pop in your responses. And then we're going to introduce our panelists and get started with our discussion. Thank you again for joining us today. All right, so we'll go about 30 more seconds to get a good sense of who's on our call today. We appreciate all of our residents. We know there's many of you who have been really passionate about this topic, so we thank you for joining us today and taking the time out. Thank you to all the non-residents and those who may be community members, may not live in Albany, but you have a real passion for this work as well. All of our students on the line, I want to acknowledge all of them. Thank you so much, students from Albany and alumni. We appreciate you contributing back to your community and look forward to hearing your youthful voices and sharing your perspective. Thank you also to our community partners and all agencies who contribute to the community work here. And of course, all of the elected officials, city council members, school board members. We want to honor and thank you all as dignitaries on the call, and just thank you for joining and for listening in and really leaning in to hear some solutions to the very things that you want to address in your community. So thank you again. For panelists, we have a sense of who's on the call. So again, we want to thank you as panelists for joining us. So now we're going to do some quick introductions. And so each panelist, we are going to ask that you share. I'm going to call your name, and we're going to share just a little 30-second kind of elevator speech about who you are and why you want to be here tonight, why you're here tonight. And then we're going to jump right into some questions that we'd love for you to weigh in on. And so again, we have with us two students, our young people's voices, which I always like to honor and appreciate, and also to help model for our youngsters who are watching, our kids who are watching this work and need to see this. Jaquel Sanders for Albany High School Black Student Union President. We thank her for being here tonight. Porsche Noble, Albany High School Class of 2019 is here with us. We have Dr. Greg Downs, who you've met, our SCJC Chair. We want to thank also Janelle Gary, our SCJC Vice Chair. We have Police Chief John Geissberger. Thank you so much for being here with us. We also have from our City of Albany Neighborhood Services, we have Sid Schoenfeld. Thank you, Sid, for being here. And also we have Roshone Atkins from the Berkeley Food Housing Project, and want to thank you for being here as well. And I want to thank all that are behind the scenes making tonight happen as well from the City of Albany staff. So I'm going to start just quick 30-second elevator speech. Jaquel, can we have you start and just share 30 seconds of who you are and why you're here tonight?
Jaquel's having a little bit technical difficulty.
Okay.
If you could start with somebody else first.
Okay, not a problem. Porsche, why don't you jump on in? Tell us a little about who you are and why you're here tonight.
Okay, well, hi, my name is Porsche Noble. I'm a student currently at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a double major in biology and art history. My family and I moved to Albany right before I started kindergarten, and I went to Ocean View when I was in elementary school. I lived there till 8th grade when our landlord doubled our rent, and we were forced to move out of Albany because we could not find any affordable housing. Though I continued to go to Albany schools until I graduated in 2019. I participated in many activities in my time as a student. I was on the women's basketball team, I did track, I was in choir, youth and government, as well as I had an apprenticeship with the City of Albany's Recreation Department. I'm here to represent the youth voice of Albany, who make up 30% of the population. I, as an Asian American, stand with the Latinx, Black, and Indigenous community, but I do not speak for them. I will never know what it feels like to be Black, Indigenous, or Latinx, and I will never claim to, but I'm using my privilege to share their ideas and viewpoints. We, the youth, are here to say that we are tired of being pushed aside and tired of the city saying it stands for the rights of its citizens without following on that promise. We, the youth, here are here to tell you that we demand real change and will never stop fighting for it, because this is about not just the past, but our futures. Then I wanted to give you my perspective. I have been asked to be—
Porsche, we'll come right back to you. Just want a quick 30-second, and then we're going to get right to more perspective. So we appreciate that, sweetheart. And thank you for your voice. Yes, we're just super excited to have youth on the line. And so we want to hear more from you. I just want to get real quick so we can do intros, and then we get right back to you, okay?
No problem.
Dr. Greg Downs, I know you shared earlier. Did you want to add anything else about who you are? What you do for a living?
I'm Greg Downs. I'm chair of the Scjc, Albany resident, history professor at UC Davis, and parent of Albany students.
Excellent. Thank you for being here again tonight. We appreciate your hard work. Janelle Gary, the vice chair of Scjc. Do you want to share a little bit more about who you are?
Hi, my name is Janelle Gary. I'm the vice chair of the Scjc Commission, Albany resident, risk management and insurance professional, and just honored and grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We're glad you're here tonight. City of Albany Police Chief John Geissberger.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for including me. I want to thank everybody for participating tonight and let you know I understand that the police department plays a very important role in this process. I also want to acknowledge that our police department, specifically in previous generations, has not always been equitable to people of color. But I also want to acknowledge the work our department has done over the last few decades to change that reputation of the past and to develop a professional community service culture that is fair and equitable to all. And we will continue to work on this as we move forward. I've listened to the comments made at the Mayor's Town Hall, City Council, and Scjc meetings, and I understand the need to constantly look within ourselves to see how we can continue to improve. I appreciate being part of this process, and I'm committed to identifying improvements we can make that positively impact our relationship with the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We know you're super busy and this is important, so we just appreciate you being here tonight. The City of Albany Neighborhood Services, represented by Sid Schoenfeld. Sid.
Hi, thank you very much, Nicole. My name is Sid Schoenfeld, and I'm the Neighborhood and Community Services Manager for the City of Albany. It's great to be part of this community dialogue session, and thank you to everyone for being here. I'm responsible for the operations of the Senior Center and the city's human services, including Albany Cares and the Albany Coat programs. I also work with both the Albany Police and Fire departments on community outreach and engagement. I look forward to working with everyone on this process to address institutional racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. Roshone Atkins from the Berkeley Food and Housing Project.
Hi, I'm Roshone Atkins from the Berkeley Food and Housing Project. I'm a program manager for Berkeley Food and Housing. We're an agency that's been around for 50 years. We're across 6 counties. We have rapid rehousing and other services. We work very close with the CARES program, the Albany Police Department, and the City of Albany. And I'm happy to be here to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. We look forward to your perspective tonight. Thank you. And I also want to just acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Shelley Holt. Dr. Shelley, you want to share who you are?
Sure, thanks, Nicole. My name is Dr. Shelley Holt. I am an educational impact anthropologist, and so I really focus on the impact of societal issues, not only on schools, but ultimately on our futures. And so when it comes to eliminating the school to prison pipeline and addressing the issues that we have in our community with institutionalized racism, that is part of who I am. I'm a graduate of UC Berkeley, as well as for my bachelor's degree, and I have my doctorate from the University of Southern California, both in urban educational leadership. So I have been in the community, I feel like I was raised in the Berkeley area, especially going to Cal for all those years. And I'm very passionate about seeing Albany definitely make a positive change. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for having me, Nicole. And I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. All right, so we have all of our panelists, and again, as moderator, I want to remind you all of, again, the topic at hand is institutional racism, and what we're going to do is go into a panel discussion based on questions that were submitted. But before we start, I just want to reiterate a few things that Chair Downs shared earlier, but also to remind us of some of the things that are existing around this concept of institutional racism, just to give you a little context about the work. As a consultant, we are not only here to support just SCJC, but obviously the city leadership and really the work of the city to address institutional racism. To make sure we have a little context, which was shared earlier, that we are dealing with over 400 years of policies and practices, whether written or unwritten, that have really marginalized not only African Americans, but it has reverberated through many communities of color. And I want to remind us of those because these are the very things that we are still trying to address to this day. And so when we talk about the impact of slavery, we talk about that being historically a space where people were marginalized and not allowed to even be considered a full human being. Where labor laws looked very different. And now we fast forward, we still see some of the remnants of those years all the way back to slavery, even though we're free people. So I want to remind us that this is really hard work because we're talking about changing a system. And we know that that system still has data that's very clear that there are people who are discriminated against because of just the color of their skin, just because of the box they mark. And so we want to ensure that we really address those and recognize that as the city of Albany, I want to commend you for being so aware and acknowledging the pain of the past, but also understanding that we have work to do. And while we have had advocacy, and I've always respected the city and the community because of the history of people being advocates, the reality is that we still have policies and practices in place at all the various levels between all the systems. It's not just the police department. We're talking about school systems. We're talking about hiring practices in many organizational spaces. And so today we're going to have to address those. And we're just kind of scratching the surface, I want to say, because we have, again, 400 years worth of work to do. And we're not going to solve it all tonight, nor in the next few years. This is going to take us some time, but we can definitely make a mark on this. And so I want to remind you just with the images that while we stand in solidarity in many spaces with Black Lives Matter, for example, I've driven around the town, I've seen the signs, and I always appreciate seeing it. But I also want us to remember that we still have rage and fear that are those emotions that create the struggle in this work. So as a community, we have to heal and be heard today and continue those conversations. And without doing that and without understanding the impact, it will be very difficult to see change. And so I want us to be reminded of that context. And as we get ready for our panel discussion, I'm actually going to share a video that I want you as a community to watch and really engage for a moment before we get ready to hear the words from our panelists tonight. And this particular video is called The Unequal Opportunity Race. And it's based on just sharing a little context about the impact of racism, not only in the city of Albany, but in so many spaces where we've seen some people have opportunities and others don't. And that's important. We recognize it through the data and through the conversations that have been had and really unpacked, like, where are we as a city? And so I want you to take for a moment, we call it a cap moment. And in this moment, I'm going to ask you to think about what was confirmed for you in this video. What questions do you still have that you would like to ask about institutional racism? And then what emotions are being provoked in you about institutional racism? And so I'm going to play that, and then what I'm going to do is then move right into our panel discussions. So I want to thank you for a moment. Those of you that are at home watching, those of you that are on the call with us, I just want you to take a moment, and I want you to, what I call, again, have a cap moment as we get ready to start our conversation about institutional racism as panelists and making connections to our various roles. So in our cap moment, again, if you want to write down a piece of paper or just have a mental dialogue with yourself about what was confirmed for you about institutional racism in the video. What questions would you like to ask about institutional racism? And what emotions were provoked in you as you think about institutional racism? And again, this particular work is hard. This particular work has lots of perspectives, which we're going to get to hear tonight. But it's important that we constantly process how we're going to address this collectively and what we understand about it, what emotions are provoked that may get in the way of us being productive in our work. And so I just want you to take that moment. This is that non-closure moment as well, because as a community, we can't share, obviously, in this space, but we're going to actually have our questions come up, and that some things may have been jogged for you that you want to ask questions about to all of our various panelists at this time. So I'm going to ask, and again, thank you for that. And we're going to move right into our panel discussion. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call names and the questions that came in. I appreciate who sent those questions in ahead of time, because these gave us opportunities to really understand the context of what you want to discuss tonight. As you can see, we have a diverse panel of multiple entities around the city. And so we definitely want to address all of the things that you'd like to hear, but also please know and that this conversation will continue, and we won't be able to address every single thing tonight. You're going to have continuous community dialogue, so I'm excited about that. But we're going to do our best to get to all the questions tonight. And again, there will be public comment opportunities after our time with the panel discussion. So again, those questions, if you have them, please enter them in the Q&A box. And we're going to start. I have several questions to ask several of our panelists. So I'm going to start. And panelists, as a reminder, if you can give us about a 2-minute response for the sake of time, so we can have time to get also to our public comments as well. So I'm going to start with the first question. And this is more from our host tonight. So Greg and Janelle, I want to direct this to you. It's just, if you can, just share some key accomplishments that SCJC has, that you're proud about, that SCJC has done to address institutional racism, because we know you're the body that's been appointed to really address some of these issues. So maybe you can just share a few things that you're proud about addressing institutional racism in the city of Albany.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'll be, brief, because as you know, I think, our work lies in front of us, and it's, it is important for people to know what has happened, but I think our work lies in front of us. Some of the things SCJC and its diversity subcommittee have asked council to do and that have been done include the creation of equity reports, and staff reports, in which, as ordinances are considered by council, staff writes up their impact upon equity issues within the city. This is something that was authored by fellow Commissioner Judy Kerr, who I believe is on the call. To publicize the data that we collect for EEO on the demographics, racial and gender of our workforce, and to publicize that. We currently have pending a request for staff to collect demographic information on the people who will apply to be the next round of commissioners, as all of our commissions expire in December and the next council will appoint new ones. And there have been other things. Earlier, SCJCs prior to me on it worked on rent review, among other issues. But I do believe the heart of our work and of our accomplishments lie in front of us. Let me stop now so Janelle can come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate what Greg said, that, our work does lie before us. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to have this conversation and present it to the community, and the community can speak to us so we can better serve you. So with that said, Greg pretty much outlined everything that we've been doing prior to COVID. I wanted the subcommittee of the diversity to, think about Martin Luther King's birthday and possibly coming together and implementing ways that we can celebrate and acknowledge everyone in the community. But like I said, as we continue to move forward, I think that the changes that we want to push forward, we will direct to City Council and work with them as we come together.
Great, thank you so much for that. We appreciate those perspective and just appreciate the SCJC for the hard work that you've done and the work to come, so thank you. I want to go to the voice of our youth on the line, Jaquel Sanders. I think your audio's working okay now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I want to do is ask you, maybe if you can, in your response to this question, just share who you are, and then also the question is share your perspective on the impact of institutional racism as a student.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Jaquel Sanders. I go to Albany High. I'm an incoming senior. I'm also the president of BFU. My experience with institutional racism, I think that it mostly affects us in the classroom while we're learning in history classes, because we never really learn much about Black history. Everything is more so focused on like the white side of history and all of their victories. But I do think that the class, ethnic studies, does a good job highlighting some of the Black history as well. I also noticed institutional racism on like the sports teams at school, how some of the white kids are favorited, and whether, no matter how good they are, the white kids are favorited and other races of kids don't really get too much attention.
Thank you for sharing your truth. Appreciate that perspective, and look forward to hearing some additional thoughts and perspectives you have as well. Thank you for that. Our other voice of the youth, a little bit older youth, but the young people, Porsche, can you share your perspectives on the impact of institutional racism as a young person in the community? And again, we'll have 2 minutes for each response. So Porsche.
Hi. So as a person of color, I've been affected by racism, but as a non-Black person, I wanted to reiterate that I do not speak for the Black, Latinx, or Indigenous communities. I'm only speaking from my experiences. So I wanted to start talking about institutional racism in Albany with redlining. So redlining happened in Albany. We were given from the top areas of Albany an A rating, the middle areas of Albany a B rating, and then the lower areas of Albany a C rating. But these ratings all classified Albany as a predominantly white community. So then I also wanted to talk about Buchanan, who is an architect in our city who built most of the houses here. He modeled most of the houses, of course, after suburbs, and suburbs are also a predominantly white community that was segregated. So I wanted to talk about now and today that how Albany today is 54% white and only 3.5% Black. So this has created a precedence in our city council to be all white, and we also have a large history of performative racism, performative activism. So I feel like this has been exemplified in the racist Instagram account that happened at our school. And it felt like this issue was swept under the rug, which I feel happens to a lot of the issues that have to do with race in our city. I also want to talk about directly in our schools, how there is a lack of Black or Latinx teachers. And if there are Black or Latinx teachers in our schools, they are usually the language teachers. Also in our AP classes, the demographic of our already non-diverse high school really shrunk down in, and showed the achievement gap in Albany. A friend of mine mentioned you would look around and the only Latinx or Black person in the classroom was you. And that's, of course, a person who identifies as Black or Latinx. So I wanted to look at these instances and demand a sort of accountability from the city to try to change these things. I yield my time.
Thank you, Porsche. Appreciate your speaking your truth and your perspective as a young person in the community is very valued, and we want to thank you for that. So the next question coming in is for Police Chief John Geissberger. So the question is, share the role of the police department in the community and some ways that the police department has focused on addressing institutional racism in the city of Albany.
Okay. I'm not totally tech savvy, so bear with me while I pull up my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So our role in the community is obviously to keep everybody safe. And how we do that is by working with the community, interacting with them, learning what their concerns are, and trying to work at finding solutions for them. We do that through some of our community outreach events. And then we also have our basic patrol presence, our officers out in the field, driving around, looking, just a presence if somebody sees a car to deter them from committing a crime. Then we also respond to calls for service, varying from crimes, traffic complaints, and quality of life issues. And then also investigating crimes and solving them. And then a little bit about who you have doing this job for you. We have a pretty tough hiring process. People go through a written test, then they have an oral board, and then I sit down with them with my 2 lieutenants and we interview them. And if they get beyond that, then they go into an extensive background where we reach out to family members, friends. We ask family members and friends to tell us of other people to talk to. So we delve into what that person is made up of. And, you know, we're all human beings. People are gonna make mistakes in their lives, but we look for patterns of behavior, and we're really looking for just to hire good people. That's what I really look for. So if they get through that, then they go on to a medical and psychological examination. And then if they're hired, we have about a 20-week field training program that not only teaches them how to do the job that they learned in the police academy, but it also kind of lets them learn about our culture and the values and the mission that we have. And if they get through that, they continue on their probation. We have a 12-month probation for lateral officers. So that would be like officers coming from another department coming to work here. And then if they're a brand new officer, it's an 18-month probation. During that time, we're evaluating them the entire time. And if they don't work out or aren't gonna buy into our culture, we have the option to release them. Or if they're, you know, if they're having struggles with the job, we can release them. And we've unfortunately had to do that in the past. Then on to how we have a bias-based policing policy. It's pretty straightforward. It's strictly prohibited. Some of the things we do to help enrich our officers, to get them to learn about more people and deal with diversity. I'm very proud to say in 2018, we were the pilot police department to take a LGBTQ class that was being certified by the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. My personal friend was actually putting the class together. I reached out to him to ask him, I said, hey, I'm looking for this training. And he told me, he goes, I'm just finishing something up and I need somebody to do it. Do you guys want to do it? So my entire police department went through it. I have some new officers we've hired who they will get through it hopefully this year. We also have a sergeant on duty who's a principal policing instructor. So in 2018, he taught our department about procedural justice and did an impartial, kind of a quasi-impartial policing class. So we do that. We brought in a gentleman from the Veterans Affairs to talk about dealing with veterans and the services that are available to them and how to identify them, and also de-escalation techniques specific to dealing with veterans. Okay. We also, in 2013, we adopted the practice of doing what's called the double-blind sequential lineup, which changed the way we do our photo lineups. We used to present people with what we'd call a 6-pack, and it would be 6 photos of, one would be the suspect, and then other what we call fillers, and we would present that to a witness. By doing the double-blind sequential, it reduces the misidentification of people, and how it's done is the investigator puts together 6 photos, but they're individual, and then they're numbered, and then they're given to an officer who does not know who the suspect is, and then he goes and sits with the witness and goes 1 photo at a time to view them. So it really, it avoids the ability that an investigator could do a unconscious cue, and it also makes it a more accurate identification. And then, you know, I know a lot of people have been interested about the Racial and Identity Profiling Act, also known as RIPA or Stop Data. We're going to be required to do our first report April 1st of 2023. In early May of this year, I actually talked with my staff about trying to get this process going ahead of time so we could start collecting earlier. The project does take time. There's technological changes we have to make to our CAD system. And then we also have to develop a policy and establish training. There's about 16 questions that then have subsections that we have to get into. So it's going to take a little bit of time. And I don't know exactly when we'll have it done. My hope is it'll be before the end of this year, but we're somewhat early on into this project. But I understand the community wants us to do this. I think it's a very good thing for us to have because it will give us feedback and understanding of where we're at. And then just a little bit, obviously, you see the demographics of the city, and then our police department demographic is this in comparison. I'm sorry, I'm not tech savvy. I would have tried to put them on the same slide, but I couldn't.
That's okay. We appreciate the perspective because I think when trying to kind of see how is institutional racism addressed, it looks like you're looking at data and really unpacking some of the policies that you've had to address over the years. And so I think we appreciate that. And I know there's a few other questions we're going to go deeper into, so appreciate giving us some context. And so we have a few more questions for you, Chief, but I'm going to get to one of our next panelists. And Sid, I'm going to ask you to share, because I know you are working with neighborhood services, which is obviously a space to provide a bridge, obviously, for the city when we talk about police and social services, and recognizing that all issues related to the police don't necessarily require the same type of service. And so can you share with us in 2 minutes what ways that the city really bridges that? And I think you were going to share your screen, if I'm not mistaken.
I will try and do that. Thank you very much for that question, Nicole. Neighborhood Services works collaboratively with the Albany Police Department to address the needs of Albany's most vulnerable residents. The Albany Police Department consistently refers individuals in need of services to the Albany Cares and Albany Project Hope programs. This allows our team the opportunity to engage these individuals at their time of need. Examples of service needs referred by the police department include assistance with shelter, food insecurity, financial assistance, and access to many other social services. Last year, Neighborhood Services and the police department had 76 in-person engagements, community programs, and events. These programs promote community awareness and inspire positive neighborhood relationships. Now I'm going to try and share my slide. And talk about some of our outreach that we've done. Did that make it? Can everyone see that?
Yes, Sid, you're good.
Okay, thank you. So just to talk about a few of these engagements that we've done. Coffee with a Cop. Last year, we hosted 8 Coffee with a Cop events where there are no agendas or presentations. It's just an opportunity for the community to talk to officers about their important issues and concerns. National Night Out. Just last year, we had our largest amount of neighborhood participation at this popular community event. There were over 45 blocks that participated where neighbors got together to socialize and get to know each other while building on neighborhood safety awareness. Shop with the Cop. During the holiday season, the Albany Police Officers Association hosts some of our Albany youth that face financial challenges. Kids are taken shopping with Albany police officers where they're given gift cards to shop for these families while enjoying refreshments and socialization opportunities with police officers. And finally, active attacker training for faith-based organizations. The Albany Police Department is always proactive in keeping our community aware of current safety trends. These trainings are provided to help these faith-based organizations stay prepared during a challenging time. And lastly, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Lastly, Neighborhood Services has facilitated 39 of the police department's outreach messaging to the community. Community messaging was produced in the form of bulletins, notifications, and press releases that promote community awareness, inspires neighborhood safety, and stimulates communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sid. Appreciate that perspective in terms of some of the interventions, we like to say, that are needed, especially when we have concerns about, the impact of people of color, people who are contacted in the community. Obviously, we want to have ultimate other ways to support and serve. So I want to go to the next question, and this is in the same spirit of support of the community. And what's in place in terms of the work from our Berkeley Food and Housing Project. And this is for you, Rashaan, with regards to how you collaborate with not only the police department, but also Sid and Neighborhood Services. I think it'd be helpful to hear the impact of your work to help address some of these issues of institutional racism that are the undercurrents in the city. So if you can share a little bit, Rashaan, we'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. So we work in collaboration with the City of Albany, the CARES program, and the Albany Police Department. We actually have a case conference that we sit together and plan, create ideas together on how to support our community members that are underemployed, underserved, homeless, individuals, high need individuals. We work together. We have a really good communication system. The Albany Police Department speaks directly with us via email, even text. So we have a pretty good relationship. BFHP provides services such as outreach, engagement, landlord relationship building. So we are rapidly rehousing clients, permanently housing clients there. And police department has a vital part of creating those relationships with clients that sometimes are resistant to services, but they know the PD, and the PD sometimes connects us to those clients. So we have a really good relationship. It's impressive what we've been able to build with this program.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective because from what it sounds like, your clientele, although it's small, it obviously is growing and obviously wanting to be proactive and moving forward. We know the impact of poverty. We know the impact of families who don't necessarily have the same resources, and we definitely want to bridge that service versus the kind of criminalization that sometimes happens when mental health kicks in, those issues of supporting it. So we just appreciate that perspective. There was another question that came in, and I'm going to direct this to our students, both student voices on the panel. And then, of course, John, if you want to chime in as the chief. And this one is around kind of the perspective on the role and interaction of police in schools. That was one that came up. And so just want to get that perspective. And maybe, Jaquel, you can jump in first, and Portia, and then John, if you want to add to that.
I feel like the role that police play in schools can be beneficial and non-beneficial in ways. I think that it's beneficial in ways because they come to classrooms and they inform us about drugs and suicide prevention, and they give a lot of good, helpful seminars at school. But I also feel like sometimes having police on campus can hinder students in many ways, because when students act out for whatever reasons, sometimes the staff doesn't always handle it and they turn to the authorities. But that hinders teenagers going forward in life because then they have a record, and that just not the most beneficial thing to get as a teenager if you're trying to do things in life.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for that perspective. Portia, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I would. So our community, our schools haven't had a lot of policing in them compared to other communities like Berkeley or Oakland, but I feel like this is because of the privilege that we have been afforded due to the racial makeup of our schools. But the only time I personally interacted with the police was our freshman year Identity, Health, and Society class. I want to express that this is my only experience, and I would like to acknowledge the experiences of Black, Latinx, Indigenous students and alumni with policing in our schools. So in this mandatory freshman class called Identity, Health, and Society, the Albany Police came in to do a presentation. And I don't mean to sound mean, but I felt like this was a way that the police could sort of paint themselves in a good light. And so I also did appreciate, though, that this was a time where we got to ask questions to the police, which often is not an encounter that I get to have. So this is also when I learned more information about the demographics of the police, but I believe the police chief has already covered that today. I don't need to go into that further. But I think really the more I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the word, but the more pressing issue is how policing has affected the greater community rather than in the schools. Because I know that from what people have told me that Black, Latinx, and indigenous people in the city have felt that they are being pulled over and at higher rates, but I would really like to see the statistics over that. And then I would also just appreciate more transparency with the police in our community because of that. So I will yield my time at that.
Okay. Chief Geissberger, do you want to add anything about role and kind of interactions in the school as well?
Sure. No, they hit on the IHS program that we do, and that's really to get kids to know how to interact with us too, because when you get into high school, you start to have more freedom and you're out and about, and it really gives them a chance to know what our job is about and understand, we're human beings too. I think the officer's there to answer questions that kids have, but also engage with them to just talk about regular things. We also do a similar presentation at Albany Middle School. And it's really important we connect with the youth because they're our future and we want them to feel comfortable coming to us. We also have a Albany Police Activities League program where we do, I think our biggest successes have been wrestling, basketball, and then we've also done volleyball camps. And so it's to get people or the kids to engage with us at a different level than being in uniform. We're there in shorts and a t-shirt playing basketball. We also try to go, we have a couple of preschools that we'll go to and interact with the kids there. And then I apologize, I don't remember the year, but years ago, we started participating in a program called McCollum Youth Court, and it has since changed over to Center Force, and it's a restorative justice program for juveniles. And it's for first-time offenders. It's run by juveniles. They have a guest adult judge who oversees the case, but then they have youth who are the jury, who are the attorneys dealing with the case, and the jury is able to kind of come to a restorative justice decision or punishment for the individual, but it takes them out of the criminal justice system. And they come up with some really creative solutions to help the person understand the harm they did to the victim, as well as trying to work and repair that. And it's community service. Oftentimes it's a letter to the victim as well.
I appreciate that perspective, and want to kind of stay in the vein of some of the questions. So I know we're kind of moving into some of the live Q&A. Just appreciate the community sharing questions. Also, again, want to remind you that public comment will also be happening shortly. So I know several of you have raised your hand, and we definitely look forward to hearing from you, and appreciate your patience with this platform as we obviously have to kind of stick to a structure. And so appreciate these questions coming in. And so I want to stay kind of in the vein of a question that came in earlier, and I want to combine it because I think there's some answers to it. And so John, you kind of have the floor, so I'm going to just let you continue for a moment. And the question actually comes from Kathleen Marte, I believe. And I'm going to kind of fold her question into a question just around training for officers and the de-escalation conversation that has come up in numerous questions. And so her question, giving context, she shared about her 14-year-old son of color who has special needs. And so her question is really around what type of training has Albany police officers had in terms of dealing with citizens with special needs, disabilities, and mental health needs. So could you share a little context for us around that?
Sure. So we really, in the academy, you get more focus on dealing with people with special needs. And once you're out of the academy and working, I honestly am not aware of a lot of classes or courses that deal with that right now. But we do deal with like the mental health. We get, our entire department, I think almost our entire department went to, I think it was 2018, to a crisis intervention training. And then we've all done de-escalation training. We do probably about 4 times a year, different perishable skill trainings that all deal with de-escalation. And trying to think, the other comment I was gonna make is, if, you know, we're a small city and our officers know a lot of people in our city. And I would offer to that parent to reach out to us. We are happy to add something into our computer data system. We can add a picture if you want, and some information that will help us know what we're going to. So if we're going to your house, we can actually have a flag that comes up and notifies us of the situation there. So feel free to do that. And if you have any problems, just let me know.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that perspective. I'm going to shift to a question that came in a little earlier, and I'm going to direct this to Sid and Rashaan so you both can kind of chime in, because obviously you've partnered together in that conversation about mental health, obviously, and obviously the issues around special needs, which also has impacted some of our homeless community. And I know your collaboration with the police department is really critical with bridging those services. And so can you maybe share some examples of how you outreach from both of your perspectives, and specifically if you can tie in kind of the impact of race in those situations, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Let me unmute.
No, you're good. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So in addition to outreach we do with the police department, Neighborhood Services operates, we talked about it earlier, Albany Cares, Albany Project Hope programs. Albany Cares works closely with all city departments to address all of Albany residents' needs. They're met. Their needs are responsively addressed in a kind, caring, and compassionate manner. Those resources include housing referrals, application, transportation, legal aid, services for seniors and those with disabilities, medical, dental, and mental health care, bill payment assistance, and much more. Albany Cares and Albany Project Hope have continued to operate and are still available to the community during the COVID-19 pandemic and these challenging times for everyone. Albany Project Hope, and I'm going to let Rashaan talk a little bit about that, but that is our homeless outreach and engagement program with Berkeley Food and Housing Project. And through our partnership, we offer the services of those experiencing homelessness or in jeopardy of becoming homeless, and definitely mental health issues as well. So Rashaan, if you want to take it from there.
Okay, Sid, thank you.
Yep.
So we recognize that there are underserved individuals and people of color. We bring data together and we tailor our services based upon that data, we look at it and we say, okay, are these people disabled? Do they have mental health disabilities or physical disabilities? And we sit together in case conference and make decisions on how we can best serve. We work closely together to make sure that we're able to do that, and we enhance our services based upon the data. So yeah, we work very close to try to make sure that we assist with the impact of the other underserved individual in Albany.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I know in our conversations, even prior to this, I know that there's an effort to really unpack the data even more, to look at the racial disparities that are impacted, and really trying to do better outreach. So I just appreciate you all sharing that as well. So I'm going to continue with questions that I see coming from the community. And again, just want to thank you all for listening in. I know there are lots of questions, and several of the questions I just want to acknowledge may be questions that won't be answered tonight because they may be better suited for our city council and leadership that's not on the call. So our panelists definitely come with different perspectives. And obviously weigh in on some of these topics, and all of these, we will take these questions and ensure that we pass them to City Council, but want to just remind us of our purpose today, and the role that our panelists play today, in terms of not necessarily being decision-making bodies, but definitely gathering this input to use to inform what will be recommended to City Council. So there was a question that came up around, oh, and you all are still moving, sorry. There's a question that came up around, and I want to allow the panelists to join in on this. And I got to scroll again. I apologize. You all are putting questions in. They're going fast for me. Sorry about that. Okay, and the question, I want to acknowledge Winsong for this question about how are Asian Americans included in the dialogue? Asian Americans have been through a lot in building the community here, but usually got ignored. There's not much taught at the school level at all. And so I want to open that up to any of our panelists to weigh in on that particular question from our community. And obviously we're talking in the context of Asian Americans, but related to, again, institutional racism, how it has impacted our Asian American community. So anyone want to weigh in on that question?
May I?
Yes, please.
As an Asian American in this community, of course, as a person of color, we have, as the Asian community, felt racism, but not in the same ways as the Black community members, the Latinx community members, and the Indigenous community members of our city. I did remember a time when Asian history was glossed over in schools, especially when it came to things like the Japanese internment camps. But I feel like this right now isn't about us. Like, it's just not about us right now. We have done a lot, but also we've also perpetuated systemic racism within this country. As Asian people, we tend to, we were brought to this country as the model citizen, and really that has hurt the other people of color in our community. And so as I would like to again acknowledge that we have done quite a lot in this community, but it's just really about us using our privilege to lift up the voices of the Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people in this community. I yield my time.
Thank you for that. We appreciate your perspective and truth, and sharing your story and answering that question. And no, we have a lot of work to unpack. As I mentioned earlier, institutional racism is something that is longstanding, and it impacts everyone. I want to say that it impacts everyone, and we never want to play what we call oppression Olympics and say who was oppressed more. But we want to recognize that obviously, yes, there is, you know, the real moment of time is that everyone is very conscious of the murder of George Floyd and has created this dialogue where we recognize that racism has impacted and reverberated across communities of color in many aspects. So we just want to thank you for acknowledging that, Porsche. Appreciate your perspective. So I'm going to go to another question. And again, want to remind the community, we're not going to get to every single question, but we're getting close to our public comment. So we love to hear voices. I'm going to keep going. And this particular question is really around, again, the impact of institutional racism, but specifically around the police department's kind of strategic plan and kind of priorities to address institutional racism. And I think the context, again, I'm going to share from one of the many questions. I know there's lots of questions about police department, and appreciate Chief Geissberger for sharing in this perspective, but also recognizing that the public will have more opportunities to have community dialogue with the police department as well. So we have multiple perspectives on this. But one of the questions around just kind of how, when George Floyd was murdered, the police department, has it enacted these kind of progressive reforms? We know in the past that all have not been effective, but what kind of reforms are the police department looking at to address police bias and really work really differently this time around, and maybe speak to police brutality and some of the ways that you're addressing those issues that specifically around institutional racism?
Sure. So I think we do our implicit bias training, which helps to deal with that. I think one of the biggest things dealing with what happens with use of force like that is, again, I go back to kind of our culture of using de-escalation to try to settle things down, get time and distance, and how we view people. No officer wants to hurt somebody, no officer wants to get hurt. We have good supervision to watch what our officers are doing and try to contain a scene and control the officers. So I think that really plays a lot in what we do. And it goes back to the very beginning of who we're hiring and making sure we're hiring people who are getting into this job for the right reason. And I think the majority of people get into this job because they want to help people and make a difference. And that's what we look for when we go to hire people. And that's what helps me sleep at night, to say what you saw with George Floyd won't happen with us.
Thank you, Chief Geissberger. Appreciate that. We have time for one more question, and then we're going to jump right into our public comment. So I'm going to, and again, apologies because y'all have some great questions in here, and many of these questions I think are repeating themselves to some degree. And I know many of them are also related to policing, so I want to honor that, but also want to make sure that we speak to all voices. And so I'm going to go to a little bit about the data. I think there's lots of questions, and I'm going to leave this last question again for the chief, just as there's a lot of questions for you, but know that you'll have, additional opportunities to engage with the community with these particular topics that are near and dear at this time. And so it's really more around data. Obviously, you have your police reports, and based on the different incidents, can you maybe shed light to how you're looking at the data around what's going on in the community, and maybe give some context to the interaction with people of color? What are the ways that you're addressing that data that's coming in around the work that your officers are doing, and how you're really moving towards addressing kind of that plan that you have in place to move forward and interrupting institutional racism and ensuring, again, that a George Floyd incident doesn't happen?
Sure. So I will tell you, data and data mining is a little bit of our weak point. And so we're currently working with our CAD vendor to be able to dig into it a little bit better so we can pull more data out. I'm working, or going to be working, with the Center for Policing Equity. I don't know if people are familiar with that. Dr. Phil Goff started it. He started down in UCLA. I was first kind of introduced to him back in, I think it was 2011, and he put on an implicit bias course. So we're going to contract or work with them moving forward to try to start getting into our data to figure out how best to do it, gather it, and they'll go over it and help figure out what our data shows, because data is data, but there's stories behind data as well. And so, and then we'll also, like I said, when we start the RIPA or stop data, that will help tell our picture as well.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. And I know that you were, you spoke about de-escalation, so I didn't want to cut you off, but I know there were a couple of questions about de-escalation, in particular about, you had mentioned like even the use of like tasers versus deadly force. And I think that would be the piece that I'd cut you off, and I apologize. But if you wanted to add that piece to it, because there were several questions, and that way we can at least have addressed that piece from the questions that were in the chat.
Okay, so you know, we do carry tasers, and again, in our attempt to not harm people, one of the things I looked at last year to kind of help provide another tool, so we're not injuring officers, we're not injuring people, is we purchased a device called the Bowler Wrap, and I would encourage people to go online and take a look at it. It is kind of like a Batman tool belt tool. And it literally is a great device that I think could potentially save somebody's life in an incident. So I would encourage you to look at it. But those are the kind of things I look at of what we can do and bring to the table to help de-escalate situations and try to resolve something with the least harm to anybody.
Awesome, thank you for that, and just appreciate you giving us time for that. I know the panel is not necessarily just focused on policing in Albany, but obviously the time and the moment in history requires a discussion. So I just want to appreciate you for that and acknowledge everyone on the panel for recognizing the harm. Again, thank you, Chair Downs, for kind of starting us off with that, to recognize the harm. Our student voices for kind of calling out the harm and being transparent, speaking your truth. This is part of the healing process, but it's also part of the process of really moving forward. And I want to acknowledge some of the comments that were made, and then of course open it up to public comment. And want to just, you know, remind everyone that this is the beginning of healing and acknowledging the pain. And we know that our Black and brown people in Albany, while they make up a small percentage of the community, they absolutely have huge experiences that haven't always been told. And so those leaders that are listening, those who have the ability to make a difference, we just want to thank you for leaning in and listening and really recognizing the experiences of families of color who have not always felt welcome, who have had, you know, nervousness when the police car sirens go behind their car because of what we call, you know, community trauma. And it's important to recognize that. And so we just appreciate, again, Police Chief Geissberger for being on to give us perspective and obviously lean in with us to help us with addressing these. And obviously City Council has allowed this process and engaging in this process and has plans to address this process even more deeply. And I just want to appreciate that in a meaningful way. And not in a way of being knee-jerk response, but definitely doing this strategically. So I just want to commend you again as a city for doing this work, and also for all the community members who, tonight is not enough. Tonight is not enough, and I want to acknowledge that. But tonight is part of that journey, and so I just want to recognize everyone who's watching, everyone who's part of this, that this work is going to continue. And I'm honored, Dr. Shelley's honored, just to be a part of this to help move that journey along. But we call it go slow to go fast, and to see 400 years of racism to be interrupted, it's going to take us some time. So again, I want to thank the panelists, and we're going to have now the mic opened up and pass the virtual mic to our public. And so we have, our goal is to end our meeting at 9:30 because we know that we could be here till 2 in the morning continuously talking, and we're not going to do that tonight, but we're going to continue to engage and commit to more listening sessions, more opportunities to engage, because this has to happen for the City of Albany. So I'm going to ask, I know that we have, again, our staff on the back end who is going to allow people to speak. So they're going to unmute your mic. And so if you would like to speak during public comment, please raise your hand. I believe I see 10 people so far who have raised their hand. So we're going to bring in our very first person. I believe it's Cassie Artenagara. And I apologize if I mispronounce any names. Please forgive me. But I believe we're gonna have Cassie come in first. And again, you'll have 2 minutes to share your perspective. We know it's never enough time, but we value and love to hear your voices at this time. And we're just gonna sit and listen. We're not gonna respond. We're just gonna listen and hear your truth. So Cassie, you're up first. And it looks like Cassia. Please help me with your name, please. Is she unmuted? Okay, there we go.
Hi, my name is Kasha.
Kasha, thank you, Kasha. Appreciate that and apologies.
I actually was just on mute on raising my hand on accident. So I'll let someone else speak so that I don't take anyone else's time.
Oh, okay, well, we acknowledge you, Kasha, for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask next that Linda Akamoto. Linda, are you there? And again, we'll allow our public to speak. We have about 2 minutes each. So Linda, I believe you're up.
I didn't request to speak.
Uh-oh. Okay, so we're just gonna just clarify again, those of you that have your hands raised, that is for our opportunity to have you speak for public comment. So if you don't wanna speak, please push that button to lower your hand. We wanna make sure we honor the time for those who want to speak. So next up is Tim. Tim, I believe it's Roshone. Are you there, Tim?
Mute myself. Hi there.
All right, Tim, welcome and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. My name's Tim Roshone. I'm speaking from Ohlone territory. I want to add my voice to those who support a police oversight committee, to those looking for new ways for Albany to create and understand safety while providing a welcoming community experience for all. I also support the idea of the City Council revisiting our president's streets names and replacing them with the names of Americans or world figures who were peacemakers rather than enslavers and makers of war and genocide against indigenous peoples here. That's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate you speaking your truth and perspective. Thank you. So next up, Susan Moffatt.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so when I moved to Albany more than 20 years ago, I felt really welcome to a warm and friendly community. And I loved the fact that in this compact little town, my kids could walk everywhere and be safe, and I didn't have to drive them everywhere. And that safety and mobility and autonomy that they had was something I really valued. And now I'm realizing that, you know, my image of this, you know, great little town was kind of a fantasy because brown and black people in this town didn't feel that same safety. Their children don't feel that same level of welcome. And, you know, we've heard at previous public meetings that, you know, black people have had their neighbors call the police on them for jogging, for moving furniture, and that they get pulled over by police again and again just for driving while black. And their children face threats at school from classmates, and they often fear the police instead of feeling protected by them. And so I think we need to reflect on this, and we really need some major changes. You know, some of this is just how we act as people and treat each other, but some of this is government. And we need, I think, a police oversight commission, because this is going to be long-term change, and we need to follow the data. We need to understand how policing works, because it's important that everybody feel a sense of belonging and safety in this community, and it's not okay for only some of us to enjoy that. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Susan. Appreciate you sharing your perspective and your truth. Appreciate it. Next up, Jennifer Watcher. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Jennifer.
Hi, this is actually Jessica Schoenfeld. I'm using my mom's computer.
Okay.
But yes, I appreciate all of you being here, and I just wanted to pose a comment and a question, which is that given that the origins of policing include slave patrols whose jobs were to catch formerly enslaved Black people who had self-liberated, and that many laws that are foundational to the United States are inherently racist, given these things, the institution of policing being the body, or police being the body that enforce our laws, that it is therefore an inherently racist and white supremacist body. So with this being said, I wanted to point out again, as one of the last questions that Chief Geissberger answered mentioned, that many cities have enacted so-called progressive anti-bias trainings and reforms. Chief Geissberger, you mentioned specifically that the Albany Police Department is looking at working with the Center for Policing Equity. So the Minneapolis Police Department enacted, as mentioned before, many progressive trainings and reforms. They also worked specifically with the same organization you mentioned for many years, on top of, again, a litany of other anti-bias trainings and reforms. Clearly, these didn't work there. So my question for you and for the Albany Police Department as a whole is, how will the Albany Police Department reform an inherently anti-Black system? I'm not asking what reforms you're going to do, because clearly these have been tried in other cities and have proved to be ineffective. I ask this, but I also follow the leadership of radical Black activists who have been calling for the defunding and abolition of police departments for countless years now, realizing that police reform is not effective. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think you said Jessica, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that perspective. Next, Brian Beal.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. I wanted to start by saying I feel much better about this than I did at 7:30. I think you're all doing a fantastic job. I particularly wanted to mention Greg talking about how this is Ohlone, former Ohlone territory, and Porsche talking about redlining in Albany. I feel that this is a very important factor. As you know, the zoning in Albany is different above and below the railroad tracks. This means there's no multifamily units allowed. So this has created a disparity, and this goes back to the 1940s, and it's created essentially, this institutional racism. Nicole, I love that video that showed the impact over generations. I think this is what I think a lot of people don't understand, because they look at free enterprise in terms of, why do Black people have all these problems? Well, if I were them, I would do things differently. I would just, it's because they're not, they don't have the same background that other people do. You didn't have necessarily the same educational opportunities. So I wanted to agree with the first two members of the public about a police oversight commission. I'd also like to express interest in participating in such a commission, having an extensive background in relations with Albany Police. But I also wanted to call everyone's attention to something going on outside Albany, and that is the situation in Alameda County, particularly at Santa Rita Jail. I've heard individual testimony that describe it as a torture chamber. And I think if people are concerned about policing, I think really you should be directing some of your attention there. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Brian. We appreciate your perspective and truth that you've shared. Thank you. We're gonna have next up Rosemary Malarkey, and I wanna make sure I said it correctly.
You did, Nicole.
Rosemary,
Yes.
thanks, Rosemary.
Actually, my question is almost more of a point of order, and that is, I had submitted a question online, and I see that there's maybe 26 questions there, and I just wanted to know, are those questions going to be forwarded to various people that we were asking? Mine was a policing question as well, but will that be forwarded to the police chief?
Hi, Rosemary, is that your final comment and question?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm having trouble with my computer. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for that. And I know we're just kind of listening, but yes, there's a lot of questions we did not get to answer tonight, which will be continually part of a conversation and forwarded to the respective people. So absolutely. So thank you for that question and comment.
Thanks.
So Aaron Teeterman, and I hope I said it accurately, Aaron.
Yeah, Aaron Tiedemann. Thank you. Thanks to all the panel for being here and talking. And I just want to start off by saying I don't speak for any group. I'm a white person in Albany. I benefit from a lot of privilege that is clear to everyone, I think. But as someone who very much wants to see change in Albany, I think this panel and our discussion has been a bit of a disappointment because a large part of the focus of this panel so far has been on the positives and everything good that the Albany Police Force is doing without examining how those services and how those things the police are doing might be better accomplished if those resources were directed elsewhere or if those services were conducted by non-police actors. And I want to echo someone who said before that it's not enough to say that in Albany, our police have implicit bias training and they see everyone as human, because the police who killed Breonna Taylor had implicit bias training. And as the previous person mentioned, the police in Minneapolis had incredibly progressive policies by the standards of this country, but what happened still happened, and we need to do more. And this isn't about, attacking the police for its own sake. It's about saying that the police are being told to do too much, and a lot of the things they do could be better done by other actors if we take those resources and redirect them to better serve the community. This is all about better serving our community and keeping it safe and serving the people who need it. And that's what this conversation needs to be focused on. And I don't think that's what this conversation tonight has been focused on to an extent. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, for your perspective. We appreciate that. Definitely look forward to the follow-up. Corey Dusty.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Corey. Good to see you again.
Hi. So first off, I absolutely unequivocally agree with Jessica and with Aaron. I am a white resident. I've recently joined the Diverse Housing Working Group. I'm also non-binary and transgender. I'm queer. I'm autistic and disabled and have identified it as crazy at different points in my life. And police don't keep us safe, right? Their job is law enforcement, not public safety. They're not held accountable to the same laws. Increased police presence increases fear in communities that are outside the status quo, including especially Black communities, but also the others that I've mentioned I'm a part of. Increasing their legitimacy through outreach and positive relationships, through getting to talk about how good they are on a panel, and through programs like Coffee with a Cop, only decreases the believability of people who are harmed, especially demographics who are systemically harmed. And those of us who are targeted by police know that police being friendly in these contexts doesn't mean that the same officer isn't going to profile and harass us like later the same day. That happened with protests all around the nation. No one should have to individually become friendly with the police and flag themselves as disabled in order to receive the benefit of the doubt and not be brutalized by police. That is not the way to fix the system. And crisis intervention isn't mental health care. De-escalation training isn't mental health care. And none of that is training on how to interact with autistic folks and people with cognitive disabilities. Elijah McClain was very likely autistic. His family hasn't been open about it, but we get seen as acting suspicious, and that compounds when you have Black skin. Humanizing the people with guns and with the power to imprison people based on their personal discretion is an oxymoron. The job and system of policing is inhuman, and this does go back to it being rooted in slave patrols and union busting. And police don't deter crime. Having better public services deters crime because most crimes come out of poverty. 76 individual engagements compared to 14,000 officer-initiated incidents and 400 misdemeanor arrests is a really sad number. And neighborhood services taking referrals from law enforcement is backwards. We need to have more neighborhood services and only use police when absolutely necessary. And the way to more public safety is to decrease police contact, not make us feel better about our police. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Corey. We appreciate you. And we have about 6 more public comment, and then we're going to be coming to a close. And again, just a reminder that if you don't have an opportunity to speak tonight, We are going to continue to have more listening sessions and also, again, follow up with many of you who have concerns or questions that may have not been answered tonight. So I want to call next on the line is Olga Miranda. I'm sorry, Cheryl Saduth. I apologize, I skipped someone. Cheryl.
Got it.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, as a Black, brown, why does it say 1 minute? As a Black, brown woman, Muslim woman with disabilities, the last few colors just nailed it for you. You know, I have 4 Albany alum in my house, including my husband who graduated in the 80s, my 3 children, 2012, 2015, and 2018. And I grew up in Missouri, and in Missouri we have a saying, Dilo has law, domestia law. It means say it, do it, prove it, show it to me. And just because you can find 1 or 2 Black, brown people who can sit on this panel and tell you that there's no problem with the police, but your community is telling you something different. This panel has been very disappointing. This whole forum has been very disappointing, very offensive to me, because you have been told, including Miss Porsche, thank you very much, and in a way, Miss Jaquel, and I know Miss Jaquel. My daughter went to school with these young women. This community has yet to reckon with what happened to my daughter and several others during their time at Albany High. And you cannot just put up sayings that say Black Lives Matter or we support Black students when you have yet to reckon with what happened to my daughter and all of these children at Albany High with this Instagram incident. This community has some reckoning to do. And until you do that, there will be no healing. You have to deal with this. These uncomfortable truths will keep coming back. I'm very disappointed and I'm offended that the impacted community gets 2 minutes to speak in a forum like this. And you keep telling me about these police. Albany police are not good to them. My son participated in APAL, and still, because a neighbor did not like us parking in a spot that was deemed to us, the police come and harass my husband because a white person say so, even though that white person was wrong, until another white person comes to his rescue. My husband is in the Wall of Fame at Albany High. My son is in the on the Wall of Fame at Albany High. That is not the way it should be done. I was recognized for 3 years in a row, and then for the last 10 years in Albany as a volunteer, a model so-called citizen in Albany. You listen to the voice of the impacted people if you want to know what is the purpose of this forum. If you're not going to listen to the voices of the impacted people, this is supposed to be about race. This is supposed to be about healing. You don't just listen to anybody. You listen to the voices of the impacted people and you take that back with you. If that means that you give some people more time, then you give some people more time. If this is about equity, you remember that old cartoon between equity and equality. You remember that. That means some people might have to speak for a minute and some people might have to speak for 4. But this community is set for a reckoning. And that reckoning says that no, it is not all fine. This young woman just told you what happens at Albany High. I can tell you that my daughter, who loved going to school, she graduated, she was 15 years old as a senior at Albany High. She is now 18 and a junior in college. So this is not someone who does not love schooling. That incident almost broke her. It broke her, and it broke many other children at school. And this community has yet to deal with it. So you don't just move on from it. You don't. And you don't just throw up a flyer. You don't just throw up a banner saying that Black Lives Matter. This is half of my DNA. This child is Black, Latina, indigenous child. My sons, my heart hurts. It beats until they walk into my home. They don't want to go back to Atlanta. I have 1 Morehouse graduate and another one who is set to graduate from there. If you want to know what to do in this community, we need a goal. We need to know what is the goal of this whole thing. I don't care that we have 1 person on the school board who loves this. when the rest of the community doesn't. I don't care that we have one person on this forum who says the police is great when they're not the ones who have a gun or standing on the other end of one of your officers' guns, police chief. My children have never done anything but what we have asked them, and I feel like I've lied to them their whole lives. I feel like I've sold them a bill of goods because they've done everything right. They dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and still they live in fear. So if you want to talk truth, let's talk truth. Let's not sugarcoat this. Let's talk these uncomfortable truths, you people.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. We know
Not do this at all.
We
Or let's not do this at all, Ms. Nicole. Don't do it at all if we're not gonna talk truth. I'm not gonna, and now let me just say this last thing.
Okay.
Thanking people for letting us have our God-given right to be human and to live in our skin. I'm not gonna thank people for letting me do that. Have a good night.
Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. We appreciate your perspective and truth, and truthfully has been heard. I know that this can never do justice for the long-term work, but we just appreciate you being here, and your voice definitely is heard. And so from the school district, Brian Doss is next up. So we just appreciate hearing from you. And I know we have a few more folks to finish off our night, and just again, appreciate it. So Brian Doss, can you join us?
Yeah, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Brian Doss from the Albany Board of Education. I have a couple of questions and one request. One of my questions is, are no-knock warrants legal in Albany? My second question is it possible to move forward the time frame for producing the data on who we pull over? I'd like to see that sooner than later. And my request is that we find a new way to respond to police calls that come from our schools. I think that there are some faculty members that weaponize the police the same as other community members, because they understand that if they threaten a Black person with calling the police, they try and scare them into doing whatever it is that they want to do. And so I'm wondering if we can figure out a way to change that so that teachers won't, when they feel as if they can't handle a student, they'll threaten with calling the police. But they only use that with certain students, and then officers, respond, and then of course it escalates. But I know there might be some circumstances in which you have to call the police on a high school student. I can't think of those because I went to Albany High, and I didn't see any. I mean, there were some fights, but I never saw where the police needed to be called onto campus. I'm wondering if we can work on a different plan for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Doss. We appreciate you joining us today and giving that perspective, and definitely, I think, look forward to collaboration with the school district to address some of these issues of institutional racism. So thank you. I'm going to call up our last folks who are going to be speaking tonight. So in this order: Kay, Karen, Malia, Allison, and Preston. I believe, if I called everyone right. So Kay, you're up first.
Hold on, Nicole, we have Olga first.
I'm sorry, Olga. I apologize. I was reading right behind you. Sorry, Olga. Please share.
Hi, my name is Olga Miranda. I live in Albany. I've lived in Albany for the last 10 years. I just want to be able to point out, I really appreciate what Cheryl said and our white allies that have spoken, because there's a lot of truth there's a lot of power in the truths that have been said. I was a little bit cynical at the beginning of this forum, simply because I don't need a damn forum to tell me how great the police department is doing, because I'm brown. I'm Mexican. I live in a community that the way that we are perceived, and my son is perceived, and I know that a lot of Black families are perceived, our children are not seen in the same light. just as an example of that, I just want to be able to point this out to the Chief of Police. I spoke to Lieutenant John. He's one of your lieutenants. Our families, Black and brown families this year, organized a graduation for our children. We wanted to uplift them and empower them on their graduation. We reached out, the Albany PD reached out to us to tell us that a parade was, it was off-putting to the community and you needed to protect Albany. And I asked the lieutenant that I had to speak with, what exactly was he referring to? Because this was just a parade to celebrate the seniors, middle schoolers, and the class of 2020. Not only did he not want to help, but just told us everything that was wrong with what we were doing. And instead of working with us as an ally, Black and brown families, which thank you for pointing out there aren't that many in Albany, we wanted to celebrate our children, and Albany PD gave us the cold shoulder and said we needed permits. But you also did not help or assist. Your lieutenant, John, didn't assist to try and mitigate the situation. So I welcome, Chief, more solutions from your officers to be able to work with the community. I thank you for this forum.
Thank you, Olga, for your perspective and truth, and appreciate what you said. Thank you. Kay, now you're up next. Kay, are you there? Are you unmuted? You may have to unmute yourself. There we are.
Hello?
Hi, Kay, welcome.
Okay, sorry. I thought I did it from my headset. I wanted to say I grew up in Albany, and I mean, I've been very involved in Albany. I went to Cornell and AMS. The experience at AMS was bad enough that I went to Berkeley High, and it was racist based. I want to mention that. And then I came back and I was like, well, can I teach at the middle school after that experience? And I did teach there, and I've also subbed at Cornell. I will say that I was horrified. I'm actually glad that the mother of the Instagram incident came on, because I was horrified by that. I couldn't believe it. There was a kid across the street. I grew up with a dad who told me about that. I couldn't believe it. And the same thing with that poor homeless guy who was like 21 or something like that and was killed on the BART tracks. I mean, I almost would have been walking there with my dog when it happened. I just missed it. You know, there's a few things related to this background. One, I kind of want to know, what is the city going to do about hate speech? Because I've experienced hate speech now. I mean, I've experienced it from Mo at Eunice Cafe screaming the N-bomb in the alley, and then driving in front of Mr. C's, a Black-owned business, and screaming N-bomb driving around there. I mean, what is going to be done with, like, how the city, because I've tried dealing with the police to deal with it, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And I mean, there's only so much the police can do in that instant. But I feel like there should be some that kind of discussion, I don't know what, about how to deal with hate speech. It's beyond just the violence. The violence is inexcusable, you know, when violence happens against someone. But there's something to be said for racist slurs against someone. I'm glad that the woman came on and talked about mental health, because that's something serious. My mom was a social worker for 35 years. It's horrifying how the mentally ill are discriminated against. And I'm glad that she brought that up too. This is something that really upsets me. So I wanted to bring that up. And I also want to talk about, can a committee be formed to discuss how to reallocate response? So if someone's mentally ill, like for example, when I see someone who's passed out and probably homeless, they look homeless, I don't call the police because I don't want them to go to jail. I call fire because I want them to get water and, you know, one of those tinsel blankets and just checked by the EMTs. And the firemen are happy to do it. But it could be, you know, a service that specializes in dealing with homeless. And also things like the parking. I've had so many standoffs with people parked across my driveway, and then the police are coming. It's ridiculous for the police to have to come for that. I mean, it should really just be something like the meter maids, you know, just circle around. I mean, the 900 blocks all the way along Solano, that's a common.
Yeah.
So
thank you. I know
I
you're
know,
trying
but
to
no, I'm
up,
just
but
saying,
you have
like,
lots of
people are
good
talking
stuff.
about reallocating funds.
Yeah.
I would like to see like a committee, maybe instead of just oversight of the police, a committee about like how can we respond to some issues beyond just calling the police.
Got it. No, this is really helpful. We're taking note of everything you just said. So thank you for that. We appreciate
And maybe it was TMI, but I mean, I wanted to give the context.
No, it's good, Kay. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate you. Thank you. Next up, Karen.
Hi, I am another resident that was born and raised here in Albany. My situation was that I'm mixed race. My mom's white and my father immigrated to this country, he's Latino. And so I grew up with an experience in Albany public schools that was, very painful because I was sort of tokenized in different classes. I remember I was put into an honors class, even though I was completely in over my head. I was the only non-white student in that class, and I could tell they used me to sort of be this, trying to equalize the class and diversify the class. I was given no support. I felt so stupid and sort of used, and it was a really painful experience. I returned here. I'm raising my kids here. I'm a renter, thankfully, and I'm raising my kids here, and my son, who's a Latino young man who's was in public schools in Albany, and he did not get the support he needed. He was sent out of class quite often, much like Olga's. She was mentioning about the schools not being supported, and I ended up pulling him out of Albany schools, and I got him enrolled in Berkeley. And my son and my daughter and I talked quite a bit about their experiences as children of color here in Albany, and they feel very unsafe here because of the way that, and I really want to point it back to the schools. I think it's really, really important, although this is a city forum, I think it's really important that you all keep your eyes on the classrooms, because what our young people are taught teaches them whether or not they are welcome in this community. And so I encourage you to keep, even though it's a city forum, to keep your eye on the schools.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for that perspective. We appreciate that. It's very valuable. Thank you. Malia, and then we'll have Allison and Preston to finish us off. So Malia, you're up.
Hi, my name is Malia Oliver, and I would like to speak in solidarity and support of many of the previous speakers who have spoken very bravely and shared their very disturbing and unfortunately very common experiences of blatant racism and hate in Albany, whether that's from the police and police officers or within the classroom or out on the streets. And I would like to just reiterate a couple points that have been made that I think are really important. And I'm also reiterating them because I think they're points that have been made very many times and aren't really being heard by many of the people in power, which is causing a lot of frustration from many of the community members. So first of all, policing is an inherently racist institution, as Jessica previously stated, and she provided a lot of context on that. But I think when we talk about police reforms, and especially in this forum, we have given the police chief extensive amount of time to really defend and explain the Albany Police Department and the larger institution of policing. And I think for that to be the focus of this event, when we are addressing systemic racism, which one could argue that policing and education are actually the system in systemic racism, to give those individuals the mic in this conversation feels counterproductive and actually really harmful for the communities that are being hurt on a day-to-day basis. So I want to call that out very clearly. I also just want to reiterate that we have been calling for a defunding of the police, for a police oversight committee. And when I talk about defunding the police, I am talking about reimagining, and I'm referring to ideas that have been developed by radical Black women as far as reimagining a society where we actually support life-affirming services. And I will leave you with that policing is not a life-affirming service, and we need to completely change our priorities as a town, because right now as a town, we're not actually supporting life-affirming services. Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. We appreciate your perspective. Next up, we have Allison. Mckenzie, Allison, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Hi, welcome.
Yes, a few years back, I wrote the chief of police and all the council people and the mayor regarding racial profiling in Albany, not of myself, I'm white, but of a neighbor of mine who's been repeatedly pulled over by the police. And I was very disappointed with the response, which I'm still hearing again tonight, that there is no data on racial profiling. That seems very blatantly unacceptable. We need to have data to see whether it's happening. And waiting till that we're required to have it in 2023 is not acceptable. It needs to happen much sooner than that. It needs to happen right away. I also believe in the idea of a police oversight commission because the police cannot police themselves. We need to know what's happening. And I was very disappointed with the response because I didn't hear back from any of the city council people or the mayor at the time. And I did hear back from the police chief, but it was even less than what was said tonight. There was even less being done at that time. He said there was no data on the racial makeup of the police force, et cetera, et cetera. So I really feel like we need more accountability here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Allison. Appreciate your comments. And last but not least, Preston Jordan.
Hello, thank you very much. Wanted to let everybody know that they have a chance to vote to undo part of Albany's systemic racism this November. Ranked choice voting is on the ballot under Albany's current election method. It's been demonstrated by analyzing precinct demography and returns that Albany's current method is systemically racist in that people of color, when they prefer a different candidate than white people, cannot get that candidate elected. Under ranked choice, they will be able to. And so this would be a chance to actually have people of color elect a representative onto our elected bodies, so they will have a voice at the table to speak to some of these issues. I would invite the Social and Economic Justice Commissioners to endorse this. It took us 10 years to get it on the ballot. The majority of the council opposed it, and we were able to force it onto the ballot through an initiative effort. Interestingly, Social and Economic Justice Commission, even though I reached out sometimes over the years, would never take up this issue. And a number of advisory body members from other commissions and committees have already endorsed it. So I would ask you to do so as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Preston. We appreciate your comments and perspective you shared. And so I know this has come to the end of our public comment. And again, I want to just reiterate that I don't think we ever can do enough justice, as one of our comments were made by one of the AUSD parents. There's never enough time for this. And definitely tonight, I want to reiterate as I get ready to pass the virtual mic back over to our Scjc chair, Downs, that I want to just thank you for recognizing that this is just one of many opportunities to engage and hear the community. And part of healing is to be heard. And so while tonight, many of the folks on the panel don't always necessarily have the power to make the change, they definitely have the power to influence change. And this is part of why we have to continue this work together. Want to appreciate each of you who participated as panelists. We know there's a lot of follow-up that needs to be done. There's lots of questions that people still have. There's lots of non-closure. But I want to appreciate everyone honoring the request for safety. I know that today was uncomfortable, but it definitely needs to be a place that's safe for us to continue the work together. And so I want to just acknowledge Sid Schoenfeld for your time and sharing perspective about ways that we're trying to support the community. I want to thank you, Roshone Atkins. I want to thank you for your perspective, sharing again how you're supporting the community beyond just what we're seeing in terms of the, addressing things through kind of the criminal lens, but more about social services and support. And so we just appreciate that and the partnership you have with the city. I want to thank our two students for their perspective that they shared. I've always honored the voices of our youth, and I think that it's very valuable. We just appreciate you sharing and look forward to continuing these conversations with you. Your voices have not been ignored. Your voices have really helped contribute to what us adults have to figure out in this work moving forward. I want to thank you, Chief John Geissberger, for your transparency, for your boldness and courageousness to be here tonight. We know that you're one of the few on the panel who have decision-making power, and so we know that that means a lot to model for other leaders around in many spaces, that sometimes it takes us as leaders to be in the space to engage and hear our community. And while we don't have all the answers tonight, I just appreciate you sharing the perspective and the reflection and acknowledging the pain, but also the plan to do something about it. I think that is something to be commended. We know that we don't have all the answers tonight, but this work is definitely valuable. And we just appreciate you joining us tonight to bring perspective around the conversation, and look forward to additional conversations with the community and supporting the work of the City of Albany and obviously the police department as well. So we just appreciate that and acknowledge all who are not on the call tonight. We know there are city council members. There's also SCJC members who've listened in, who aren't necessarily on the panel. We know all the police officers who are hearing, the teachers, the administrators, the school board members, everyone who's part of this, the business owners. Everyone has a role in this, and we just want to acknowledge you all, because again, institutional racism harms everybody. And ultimately we have to acknowledge the pain, but we also have to come together and heal together. And so I and Dr. Shelley, on behalf of her, want to appreciate being here in the space with you. We know it's a long journey, and we're just getting started and partnering with you, but we look forward to the future. And if you have questions or comments, I'm just going to share my last slide if you want to reach out, and I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Chair Downs. And want to thank you again, SCJC, for the opportunity to engage in this conversation, for hosting this event tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Chair Downs, for a closing comments, and again, look forward to future dialogue based on this concept and many others that are near and dear to the hearts of the citizens of the City of Albany. Thank you again.
Thank you, Nicole. I'll talk very briefly and then pass over to Ms. Janelle Gary, our Vice Chair, to close out. I think it's clear from tonight and from our other work that we have a lot to do and a lot more to do. And if this is all, this is important tonight, but if this is all we do, that it will not have been nearly enough. I'm very thankful, though, that it's not the only chance that we'll be able to do things, and want to just remind people of that. I do also want to thank the staff who put this together, everyone who appeared, everyone who listened in. A few things that I saw both in the questions and coming out today, some of which were addressed, some of which aren't, and which I hope, we can get can get ways of addressing, especially on the question of specific policies, of which there's a range that are mentioned in the questions that we can make sure get clearly stated on FAQs or future fora. The question repeated a couple of times in different ways is about how people can have the skepticism of whether policing can reform given its past and its history, and how to address that. I think is something important to address, how to make sure that everyone is heard in this and future fora, and how to make sure that this is not the last time we get to, the public gets to ask these questions. All those things that I saw out there, I wanted to give a quick call out to. I agree that there are, with the statement that was made, that we'll be judged not by what we say, but by what we do. In terms of what we do, we all have to make this happen. We can do more fora. Obviously, we're figuring out these events in terms of dealing with them in Zoom in this context, and we're open to suggestions and advice on how to focus them. But there are specific ways that people can stay involved. After tonight, City Council will meet Monday, including a study session on policing that begins at 6 p.m. SCJC will meet on August 4th, and then we'll meet again later in August, and we are open to having another public forum if there is interest in that. In the end, all the suggestions that move up will go to City Council, and City Council will vote, and then the people of Albany will vote in their elections this November. So this is not the end of the process, but it will take all of our involvement in order to make the city the kind of city that we hope it can be in the future, even if it hasn't always been in the past. So with that, I want to turn over to Ms. Janelle Gary, our Vice Chair of Scjc, to close.
Thank you, Greg. I want to thank the staff. I want to definitely thank Ms. Nicole Anderson for putting this together. You know, I just want to say this as I sat back and listened to the community speak their truth. The young lady that talked about the Instagram incident with her daughter. It brought back so many memories because as a child, I grew up being called derogatory names. I then raised my daughter, brought her to California, and she also had to endure the names. It hurt me. It hurt me to hear what happened. And when I heard the story, what happened here at the school district, I was saddened, and I was told there was kids just were bored and didn't have much to do, and they just did something. And no, it wasn't. That was someone that looked like me. That was someone that is hurting. The mama is hurting. I'm hurting because it brought me to tears. It brought back what my daughter went through, what I went through. No one should ever have to go through that. And so as we get ready for this election, telling you to vote, I'll tell you this. When I went out yesterday to collect signatures and to see some people just ignore me, turn their back. No, I don't live here. No, I'm not interested, without even talking to me. There's a problem in this community and it needs to change. It's not just the police. I know everybody's on the emotional roller coaster about the police, but it's the community. And if we don't stand up, and let our voices be heard, it will continue. So I thank everyone that's on this panel. I definitely thank the community for sharing. These young kids, I know because my daughter went through the same thing. And it hurts my heart now. That's all I have to say. I just want to say thank you.
All right, so with that, I think we've come to the end of our session together. Again, I want to thank everyone for staying engaged, for experiencing discomfort, for speaking your truth, and last but not least, for expecting and accepting non-closure. We're on this journey together. This journey is hard, it's messy, but progress, again, without the struggle, there is no progress. So I just want to thank you all. Look forward to working with you. Again, thank you Scjc for hosting this, and we look forward to the work that is to come, and really appreciate all of you panelists who shared in today with us and all the community who's joined us. We want to thank you. And again, we'll see you very soon. Be on the lookout for the city newsletter with the dates and the upcoming events that will happen to continue this work together. So this is not the end. This is just part of the journey. We're going to continue together. So thank you very much. Have a great evening.